Let's Talk Bitcoin listeners, it's now time for The Startup. The Startup is a show featuring the founders of new companies. We want to discover how they took an idea and transformed it into a marketable product or service. Starting a business is challenging and rewarding. Our goal is to gain insight into the mind of entrepreneurs on their journey to success. Let's welcome Adam B. Levine, the CEO of Tokenly. How are you, Adam?
I'm good, Michael. Thank you very much.
For those that may be tuning in for the first time, can you give us a little background introduction?
Sure. So I started life as a podcaster way back in 2005 and basically found that as the medium that made the most sense to me. And so over the next, number of years, I wasn't making money or doing this professionally, but it was the thing that I was having the most fun doing. I probably have at this point maybe 700 or 800 episodes released under various shows under my belt. It was kind of a natural thing when I came to Bitcoin that a podcast would be it. Long story short, we're 2.5 years from that point where we started Let's Talk Bitcoin, and it's grown from just a show on a Tumblr blog into a network with its own, with its own everything. We've invented the wheel in so many ways. It's almost kind of hard to go down the list because I'm just so used to it at this point. That kind of was the broad impetus for the Tokenly project and now the Tokenly company, was that all of the things we were doing with Let's Talk Bitcoin as a show and Let's Talk Bitcoin as a network had this kind of gap in it. And the gap was giving people the ability to really participate in the network. And then once we had that ability with our LTB Coin rewards program, the gap became not, having the token, but figuring out how to actually make it so that normal people could use it. And that, normal people who could make their tokens valuable, who could, create a token that people would actually want to have and want to use, would be able to use it, because there was this big gap between people who had good ideas of what could be done with a token and people who actually could make tokens valuable because they already make things valuable. Whether they're a store or a brand or whatever, there are all kinds of things, but individuals very rarely, it's just not the way that things work. These adoption and utility comes from being able to use things, and use comes from people being able to accept things, and acceptance, until we built the Tokenly tool set, was really, really hard. So that's kind of in a nutshell of how we got from there to here. This is my first time as an entrepreneur that is working with a company that intends to be funded. Everything else I've done, I've always done entrepreneurial projects, but they've all been powered by volunteers, as Let's Talk Bitcoin has mostly to this point. Because it was all hobby. So this has been kind of an interesting journey for me, because I came into this space and really had no ambitions of starting any sort of companies or doing any of these things, and saw a lot of projects start and a lot of projects fail, in large part because, from my opinion, I think that the instincts of the people who were creating the projects in large part were wrong. And that there is a type of ethos that you need to bring to projects when you're working in a decentralized space with cryptocurrency and things like that, that reflects and takes advantage of the things that are offered by those technologies and doesn't instead try to kind of hide them and abstract them away. Ironically, turns out much of building the company Tokenly has been abstracting away those complexities, but we've done it in such a way that doesn't sacrifice the advantages they give. It just makes it easier for users. So that's pretty much the starting point.
Okay. What was your motivation for starting the LTB network, and what problem were you trying to solve?
Well, when I started Let's Talk Bitcoin, the reason to start it was because there wasn't anything else. And so when I came to Bitcoin, I had bounced off of it a few times, and in 2013, and actually, it's funny, I had started a few Bitcoin shows before that, but they had never really caught. Let's Talk Bitcoin corresponded, we released those first episodes during the bubble in 2013. And so the price had spiked from, I think it was about, $30 or $50 earlier up to about 200. And so we had this huge rush of interest because we were the only podcast that was out there. We were talking about things besides the price, which was also very important to me. And there was so much interest. I mean, that was the main thing, is just that, like, when you look at the way that Bitcoin media, specifically cryptocurrency media, especially in hindsight now over these last 2.5 years, you look at the chart of Bitcoin price and you look at the chart of, Let's Talk Bitcoin network popularity, and it correlates almost perfectly. Because again, just like cryptocurrency is one of those things where unless you really feel the problem, then you're only interested in it because, to feel the problem that it's solving, then you're only interested in it because it's going to make you rich, right? And so that was what, in large part, it was sold to early people who got into it, who weren't there because, decentralization provides solutions to my problems, but because, I'm going to make a lot of money because this has gone up in value a lot. So it's interesting because we really take it from that other perspective, from the perspective that the price is an indication of interest. And it's the ideas, people, and projects, that's the catchphrase that I've been using now for more than 2 years, that are the important part, because that's what we can learn from. You can't learn anything from the price outside of, hey, I made some money, or hey, I lost some money. But you can learn things from the individuals who are actually doing this stuff. And in a time where there are no best practices and where this is just, we're breaking new ground no matter which direction we walk in, just because it's never been done before. That's really the valuable part. Whether they succeed or fail, the experiences are what matter.
Okay. Because I remember a piece there, because I started listening to the network in April of 2013. And I remember that the community started growing. And so I seen the evolution that you grew with the community and you came out with the coin. But I heard in other interviews that you talked about there was a bootstrapping problem. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. The bootstrapping problem is actually why we started the Let's Talk Bitcoin network, because whether you're talking about a podcast or really anything else, any type of business, the first couple of hundred customers, the first couple of hundred listeners or users or whatever it is that you're looking for, really that's the hurdle that needs to be overcome. And once you've overcome that hurdle, then it kind of becomes a self-feeding cycle where people who are interested in it can actually recommend out, and you get that kind of word of mouth thing going on, and you can grow very quickly from there. But getting that first couple hundred or that first 1,000 users is really, really difficult. And so the Let's Talk Bitcoin network, at the point that we launched it, every time a podcast would go out, would, join the network and go out, they would go out to, thousands of people, where previously they'd been talking to tens or hundreds. And so that really was, so that's kind of how we helped people to bootstrap. Bootstrapping ourselves, gosh, that was pretty much just us. That was like all the hosts of Let's Talk Bitcoin and, just producing the show. That really was what it was, just providing a consistent, kind of layered approach to new episodes coming out on a predictable basis. I think it was important that we were more than weekly, because it took us kind of out of that normal schedule that people get into with podcasts where, these are all my weekly podcasts, and put it into a different category where, this is a podcast that comes out more frequently, so I have to prioritize it because otherwise I'll fall behind on episodes. So,
I did not realize that there was some madness to the twice weekly show strategy.
Well, if you think about it, actually, so the show that I did right before, so that 2 days a week is actually down from 5 days a week, which is what we started the show as. The show was originally called The Daily Bitcoin. That was the first brand that I wanted to go in with. And I actually had the weekly Bitcoin and the daily Bitcoin, and I wanted to stay weekly and I wanted to do it weekly. And actually what I wanted to do is kind of like a video show that would be like a weekly, highlight and recap of everything that was going on. And I forget who it was who I talked to, but basically it didn't take long before I was convinced, even though I was the one doing the editing, that we should be producing a daily show and that the daily show should be edited and going out the same day. And so I did that for about a week. And then I completely collapsed, and we actually had a ton of interest. It was a fascinating experience, because I had, more offers from people to give me money and more offers from people who wanted to do stuff from the show. But the reality is that it just couldn't happen. It wasn't doable. So 2 was my compromise. 2 was the less than 1. But then as time went on, I kind of felt like that was the important part, was that making Let's Talk Bitcoin into something that people could rely on as just some interesting thought. That really was all it was. We weren't aspiring to be anything but just interesting, thought-provoking content that most importantly was content dense, because that was another thing that I really is a pet peeve for me, is like radio content in theory is really, should be engaging, but in practice it's not. And it's because the value that is in there is so spread out, like they stretch out 10 minutes or 15 minutes worth of content over what is effectively an hour once you've taking into account all of the kind of host-to-host banter that is maybe personable but doesn't actually tell you anything, and then the advertisements on the other side. So we went into this kind of with that idea, was that we were going to provide a service, provide something that was very dense, and then in hindsight, again, about 6 months in, I realized really this is a historical record. We're talking with a lot of people who are then going on to do very impressive things, and we're talking to them early. So the fact that this is out there means that, again, that perspective that was already valuable when we talked to them originally can be even more valuable as time goes on, because it represents a very early look into what would become big projects.
I like that. And I can tell you, I've gone back and listened to a lot of the previous recordings, and I can see how they're valuable, because it depends upon what you're doing as a podcaster. If you're driving somewhere, or if you're just consuming it and you're at one level of interest, but as that interest continues to increase, you may go back and say, oh, I want to listen to that interview again. And it has more value from the second time or third time because you have a better context of what's going on. So I could see that.
Yeah, the great part about podcasts just is that they really are forever. And that's something that is a little bit more new now than it used to be. I have no episodes, for example, except the ones that my father has saved on a very old machine with iTunes on it from my original 2005 show. And we did, 220 or something episodes of that or so. And those were like 2 hours long. So, there's a huge amount of content that is possible that is out there. But because until somewhat recently, this stuff wasn't necessarily being preserved, it kind of all gets lost. But yeah, I think that, especially with stuff like what we're doing here, where we were so early into Bitcoin, that was really the important part. And it was just important to get in there. And again, the reason why we do an edited show, for example, is exactly the same reason. Is because when we were talking to these people, like David Schwartz comes to mind from the Ripple project. These are people who are incredibly smart, and yet they have a real difficult time speaking about this stuff, in large part because their brains move faster than their mouths are capable of keeping up with. And so you find that when you're talking about live, or you're talking about video, or you're talking about any of these other formats, they don't really do so well in it, because that verbal filler that goes in there really gets in the way of people understanding what the actual point is. And it makes it less about the idea and makes it more about the person. And that, again, the people are important, but the ideas really are what matters. The people are just vehicles for the ideas.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that, because one of the reasons why I wanted to start this show was to really give the entrepreneurs opportunity to talk about the product or service that they're offering. But then the second aspect, I want to understand what an entrepreneur goes through from a psychological aspect of running a startup. How does he have to pivot? What changes he needs to make? How does he deal with family and running a business? How does he adjust to the funding requirements of running a business? All of those types of things. So I think that there is value in that.
I agree with you. I'm not sure how many answers I'm going to have to these questions. I'm, happy to give you my perspective, but like I said, this is my first time through this meat grinder. So, I've been through other meat grinders before, but this one is definitely new and unique.
Well, it's funny though, because when I say, well, Adam, are you running a startup now? And you say, yes, it's called Token Lease. But to me, LTB Network itself was a startup.
Well, and to a large degree it is. That you are correct about that. This is a hang up that I have. And it's something that I've been trying to deal with, and something that I think we are going to deal with. My role at, Let's Talk Bitcoin and the LTB network, I've always just wanted to be a content creator. I've wanted to be a content creator, and I've wanted a platform that would give me the opportunity to do that without treating me unfairly. And so I feel like I'm a fair person. I am very, results oriented. And, just in general, I feel like I'm a good leader for stuff like this, because I really don't care. What I care about is that the rules are applied on an equal basis to everybody, and that the rules, at least to their own logic, make sense. And so when you're talking about any type of enterprise, whether it's volunteer or a startup or not, leadership is required so that you aren't just going in a million directions. If anything, I would say that, I have been sort of derelict in duty when it comes to Tokenly, when it comes to the Let's Talk Bitcoin network, because in large part, I never intended to start the Let's Talk Bitcoin network. It was just something that kind of happened, And, and of course it happened with a set of assumptions that we were going to be able to provide monetization services for the people who are using the network rather than just a platform. That was something that was definitely important, that, solving that bootstrapping problem for new shows out there was definitely important. But we also really wanted to help them make money. And we launched the network right at the peak of the bubble. And when people were spending a lot of money and feeling like they had a lot of money to spend, and we've never really gotten back there since. So we brought the network on. We've had success in, expanding wildly the number of shows that are available on the network. And we've done it in such a way that it hasn't taken anything from the podcasters. It's been purely additive. So like we don't even have written agreements with them. They simply follow the rules of the platform, which means not falling outside the bounds of what is acceptable according to our stated rules. And they produce the shows on their own and they post the shows on their own. And so long as they continue to meet that minimum level of quality, then they have the use of the platform. It's available for their use. That is the point.
Proof of participation. How did that come about? Because I think that was a brilliant idea. And before I let you answer that question, I could just remember once you started, the coins were issued and you came out with the schedule and you published the document. And then you explained how proof of participation works and what the reward was for each individual action. But for me as an end user, it created this psychological habit that I wanted to earn these points. And so it incentivized the user base. And it worked. It worked and it still worked. So from a user, that was brilliant. How did you come up with that idea?
Proof of participation was an idea that came to me after I had seen the ProtoShares project do such a good job in its first weeks of making everybody want to be part of that project. And they did it by accident. They had what was effectively supposed to be a 2-year distribution schedule, but because it was tied programmatically to mining and to certain metrics within mining, it wound up essentially exhausting itself in about 3 or 4 months. And I watched that and I participated in it, and I thought it was just absolutely the smartest thing I had ever seen. And it created this incredibly cohesive community where there had previously before been nothing, and really did a great job. It was, in my opinion, the best thing that the BitShares team has done so far, and it continues to be their greatest contribution. And it was the inspiration for proof of participation. So proof of participation took the idea of making it so that everybody could mine, and said, okay, well, if everybody can mine and we don't need miners, then how can they mine in a way that is beneficial to whatever the thing is? Let's rethink what mining can become. And so for the users, and so you can take this concept and apply it to pretty much everything. When we applied it to the Let's Talk Bitcoin platform, it made sense to incentivize a couple of different groups. It made sense to incentivize content creators who were actually creating content that would cause people to have a reason to visit the community if they weren't just there to be part of the community, which was important. We thought it was important, and then in that circumstance, it was important to both have a stable reward. So when people create content for us, they get paid twice. They get paid on the first Saturday after they release, and they get one share essentially of the total amount that is being given out to content creators during that week based on the number of posts they have. So if there are 10 posts in a week and you wrote one of them, then you get 1/10 of whatever the LTB coin amount is. And then 3 weeks after that, there's a second round that is what we call proof of value. And proof of value looks not at it's not flat rate. It looks at all the metrics that we're going to talk about in proof of participation. Basically, it looks at how many magic words have been submitted. It looks at how many different unique individuals have looked at your post. It includes the amount of comments. I think that each individual post gets. I think that there's one or two other things too. And then it takes all of the pieces that were released in that 3 weeks prior period, and it compares them against each other with these as their scores. And then if so the one that is the most popular and had the most comments and all these other things proportionally gets the most, and it kind of goes on down the list. So you have the one round of compensation that is flat and it's just based on having posts, and then you have the one that's based on the incentivized layer where we want the best performing ones get rewarded more and to the detriment of the worst performing ones. And then the other side of it, of course, is, like you said, proof of participation. And that was all of these things. That was commenting, that was entering magic words, that was even just looking at pages. Every time that as a user, you visit a content page, or like a podcast page or a blog post on Let's Talk Bitcoin, you actually are earning points that will then get you LTB coin at the end of the week, not just for you, but like I said, also for the content creator. So there's this nice kind of synergistic relationship that comes into play where it's not really about how did you come up with the specific things, and it's more about when you look at a system, what adds value to it. Whatever adds value to it. Why are people there? If like, again, the audience plays a role in that. If there was no audience there, then why would content creators want to participate? If there was no content creators, then why would the audience want to participate? So it just kind of aligns the incentives in such a way so that everybody benefits. And it's not, again, and the other part about it is that it's not expensive. And that was a thing that a lot of, people have asked, why don't we just give out a rewards program in Bitcoin? And some places actually do that. But that's the problem, is that it is literally very expensive, because instead of being able to create this token that you then make valuable, or hope to make valuable in our case, you actually have to put out value up front, which is much obviously more expensive than not.
How important do you think proof of participation was to keep the user base engaged and involved with the network?
To be perfectly honest with you, I don't actually think it was that important. I think that to a certain subset, and there were not certainly just one subset, but there were a couple of different subsets within the community who really, really latched onto this and saw it as a just not only awesome program, but frankly, a way to make money. And that was something that we didn't really expect. Really, the thing that I learned from the LTB coin rewards program so far is that you have to have the complete picture before you start doing one of these things. Otherwise, it's very, very difficult. Because the situation with LTB coin was such that we were able to start giving it out, but nobody was able to use it effectively for anything outside of these very, very specific events. And we were giving out a lot of it. More than 50% of the LTB coin has already been given out now that we've just crossed the first year border. And the amounts are going down quite quickly. So we're past this kind of broad distribution stage. And now we're into the point where the value of it really has to make itself known. Otherwise, there's not much point in it being around. So this kind of brings us back to Tokenly. That actually is the reason why I've been so focused on building solutions like Tokenly. And before I started Tokenly, I was already focused on this. I realized this pretty much as soon, the first month that we had that we had LTB coin out, that we were going to need solutions to be able to easily use tokens beyond the wallets that were already available, that we were going to need to be able to, sell tokens and to let other people sell them too, not just us. Because that was another thing. We could sell tokens early on, but it was this really hacky system that Nick put together in a couple of weeks, and it worked well for our purposes, but it couldn't scale. And so that, again, is what we wanted to do, is because this problem, although we were one of the first to feel it, I was one of the first people to launch a token like this, and then to really realize, oh snap, now that I've done this, that became the easy part. The token is simple, and the part that's hard is anything that I or anybody else wants to actually do or use with the token.
So from what I've been observing about Tokenly, it's basically a three-pronged strategy. One is the wallet. So me as a token holder, that's where I can deposit my tokens and transact them back and forth. Then there's 10, which is the redemption of a token once I want to redeem it. And then there's the swap bot for as a token creator, if I want to exchange one value of token in exchange for my token. Is that an accurate description?
That's what we call the alpha ecosystem. And yeah, Tokenly is a really, really ambitious project, but it's layered. And so this first layer, you pretty much hit it. Those are the things. There are a couple of points to point out, though. One, with the swap bots, anybody can create a swap bot. You don't have to be a token creator. So Michael, for example, if you think that you can really, sell sponsorships for Let's Talk Bitcoin, you could buy sponsor tokens from us in bulk from one of our bulk vending machines, and then you can create your own swap bot, fill it up with sponsor tokens that sell them at below our retail prices, but above the price that you paid for them at the bulk rate. And anybody who you sell them to, or anybody, who buys them from you, can then redeem them with us. and you can make a profit between the difference between the bulk price that you pay and the and the retail, or closer to retail costs that you're able to achieve from it. So that's that was a really important part for us, was making it so that it wasn't just about coin creators and it wasn't just about very specific users, but that these were just generic, basic, ground level tools that anybody could use for whatever the purpose is.
Okay. So in that scenario, I can go through and purchase a bunch of tokenlies and then hold on to them and go back and resell them, and they'll be honored by the LTB network?
Well, we're not talking about tokenlies in this case. That's a different token. We're talking about, well, the example I was giving you has to do with sponsor tokens, which are redeemable for a sponsorship of the Let's Talk Bitcoin show, just as an example. But that is kind of the important thing to realize, is that once a token has been sold, it can be resold, it can be gifted. That's one of the things I'm really excited about, actually, is that as we get more merchants who are offering different products in token form, like imagine using a Bitcoin mixer, right? You could use a Bitcoin mixer with tokens and have an automatic gift exchange system where people put in, fixed values of different tokens. Like I put in a token that's worth $60 and it gives me back $60 worth of other tokens that other people have put in, and mine gets, split up or sent to somebody as a whole thing or whatever. But I mean, like, once you get the products represented as tokens, then all the crazy stuff you can do with Bitcoin, suddenly now you can do with products. And that's a really, really interesting set of things kind of that are going to become possible.
The magic word for this episode is LTB network. That's LTBNETWORK. Go to LetsTalkBitcoin.com and enter the magic word to receive your reward. Now, back to the show. So you talked about the layer, and you said the tokenlies, the pockets, which is the wallet, as well as 10, that is tokenly alpha, and that's layered. What's next?
It really depends. Actually, we haven't really picked. The plan right now with Tokenly, and this kind of gets to the question of when do you pivot. Right now, Tokenly is being developed as what I would call a pure infrastructure company. And so our purpose is to build these sort of base level tools that once they exist can be taken, like you could take SwapBot and Tend and package them effectively into Tokenly pockets. Like if somebody wanted to do that right now, we're going to be doing it in the reasonably near future. Like you'll be able to, within the wallet, look up a token and then open up all of the swap bots that accept or sell that token and pick the one that you want to deal with and work with it right in the wallet. So there's a lot of stuff like that where you can start combining what are essentially standalone components right now, but are really designed to be modular components in the not too distant future. And then once you've done that, once you have, okay, well, you've got a wallet built in, you've got the ability to sell tokens and the ability to redeem tokens all built into the same application. And the application isn't running the infrastructure. It's being provided by Tokenly through APIs. Basically, you can build anything. That's really what it comes down to. And so I've got a bunch of papers that I've written, some of which will be published in the reasonably near future, and some of which I'm still hanging on to while I'm working on. But yeah, that's really kind of what I see as next. So right now we are attempting to fund Tokenly as an infrastructure company where we are going to enable all of these use cases and be kind of like a Dropbox company or like a WordPress company where we develop these tools and then we offer hosted versions of them. But ultimately, they'll be components in other people's applications. Just as a basic example of what one of those later level applications could be, we could talk about Audible. Audible is an audiobooks platform that is owned by Amazon. And it's probably the most popular audiobooks platform out there. It's a perfect example of a tool that you could take what we've built and essentially build a much better version for everybody but the company, right? For everybody but the Audible company, that would create not only a better product, but also would be much more equitable in the way that value is distributed through the platform. When this application gets built, whether or not it's built by Tokenly or built by somebody else sort of doesn't matter, because Tokenly makes the most sense and will be the cheapest to provide the infrastructure support to make it all happen. So the process right now is this. If you want to get a book published through Audible, you contact them and go through an approval process, essentially. They have to actually want your book. And then when they sell your book, they keep between 50 and 60% of whatever the sale value is, whatever they sell it for, which is interesting because they have a credit system that I don't want to get into here. But and then the narrator and the author get to split whatever is kind of left over from that. So you can already tell right off the bat, this is a totally exploitative, very monopolistic type of way to do this. Essentially, the platform is an equal partner with the content creator, which is crazy because the creation of the content is real work that has to be done by all those individuals, where the platform is just something that has to be built once and then maintained. So the costs to each party are totally not accurately reflected. It's just possible because, and they also demand exclusivity is another thing. So if you took Audible and you pivoted it a little bit so that instead of it being a monopolistic, a debt-based system, basically, you make it so that it's built around the idea of token-controlled access, then here's what you wind up with. You wind up with when somebody wants to list a book with the service, they don't ask for permission. They create a token that is going to represent their book. They have their book, in whatever format they're going to be selling it in, and they take both of those things to the platform. And the platform has, a form essentially that's an automated way to add your media, your content to the platform, right? So you pay the fee, whatever it is, maybe $100, something like that. You indicate the token that is going to be the access token, that is going to be the thing that within their application, when a user has this token, they can use your content. They can see your book, they can hear your audiobook, whatever. It's available in all of the applications. And this is already how Audible does it. When you buy a book from Audible, you can't actually download the book anywhere in a format that you can use on anything other than an Audible application. It's what's called a closed application environment, and it makes it so that they can actually control who owns it. You only need to do that when you don't have tokens. The possession of a token, like if I have a book in this system, Michael, and I want to give it to you, all I have to do is send you the token, and you then have the book as long as you have the token. So I could lend it to you and expect you to give it back to me, or I could just give it to you, or I could sell it to you, or I could do any of these things, because in reality, I actually own it because I own the token. The author can, instead of looking at the platform like a partner, now can look at the platform like a service provider, where it's not about them accepting you or not. You just have to want it to be on the platform, pay them the fee that they ask in order for it to be on the platform, and then you can handle the rest yourself. They're not responsible for selling your book. They're not responsible for making sure anything happens, and you're not trapped on their platform. If there's another Audible around the corner that also offers this same service, you could be on both platforms. And when you sell that token to your users through your web page with a swap bot, as the author, then the reader, the person who buys your book, has the choice of either or even both that they would like to have access to it, because the token exists at a level above the platform. And so because of that, it can be used by many. It's not owned by Audible.
This reminds me of the current LTB content submission process. The only thing that seems to be missing is a multimedia player that has token controlled access built in.
Right. I mean, it really doesn't matter what use case you're looking at. I'm not even talking. We've talked about, and I've been interested for a long time in having Let's Talk Bitcoin become kind of a broader publishing platform that was able to reach into more spaces and do stuff like that. And the question has really always been, does it make sense for it to be LTB, or should we just have another name and LTB becomes the cryptocurrency focused arm of whatever it is that we're talking about? But when you go down this rabbit hole of using tokens and token controlled access to kind of reinvent a lot of these models, then that's what you find, is that these are really better ways. And they're better ways not because the old ways are bad, but they're better ways because they can do things that were impossible with the old ways. And so really it stops being about, should we do this or should we do that? And starts being about, what can we do now that we always wanted to do that just wasn't possible until now?
That's interesting, because I was explaining the whole token concept to a friend of mine, and he asked this question. He says, well, why are tokens important? He says, because right now, the user base have credit cards, and they can go out and use credit cards and accomplish a lot of the same things that you can with tokens. What would be your counter argument to that? What can tokens be used for that you can't do right now?
Yeah. Anytime you're talking about new technology that introduces new possibilities, getting out of the old paradigm is the difficult part. We look at the world around us and we think, oh, this is the way things are because it's the way that things are. But in reality, it's the way that things are because of the limitations that we currently face. So you talk about something like credit cards, and that is the perfect example of a solution that was good enough to work, but not good enough to be a solution. And I mean, like it scratches the itch, like you can pay with it, but there are all sorts of fundamental problems that are built into the system that are just dealt with because there wasn't another way to do it. So the thing that immediately comes to mind is that when you buy something anywhere on the internet or not, you don't actually own it. You own a debt until you have taken possession of it. And this is a very important thing to keep in mind. Tokens essentially, so there are two things that happen when you're buying something that happen almost simultaneously, but that are important just to recognize the difference between. The point of sale is the point at which you hand dollar bills or pay with your credit card or whatever to the merchant. And the point of redemption is when they then give you back whatever it is that you just paid for. So in the modern world, there is no gap between this. And that is because there is no trust. The difference between that point of sale and point of redemption with tokens compared to everything else is that there's nothing to support it in credit cards or cash or anything else. You could do like a coupon, which is effectively what tokens are. Tokens really wind up looking like digital gift certificates because they represent, I've paid for something and this represents the full payment of that thing. But I could give it to somebody else and it still equals full payment for their purposes. That's remarkably different than when you're talking about credit cards, where payment is based entirely on identity. So you've got it from both sides. On the one side, tokens make it so that you don't have to have identity tied up in these transactions at all, because identity is part of the old payment system and the new payment system doesn't need it. But then on the other hand, you've got this trust gap between, okay, I paid for something and I don't want it now. Maybe I want to send it to a friend or do something, or sell it or whatever, but I can't do that without taking possession of it. It would be much better for me if, my friend is going to be the one receiving these candles, if they just deal with the candle maker directly and ship, get to pick the sizes and the scents and all these things. And all I have to do is just give them generic candle tokens that can be redeemed, one per candle or one per pack of candles, what have you. It makes it very simple for them. There's no exchange rate volatility. There's no chance the price can, you don't have to give people money. You're effectively giving them gift certificates. And so that's what this is. The token goes in between what were previously smushed together. So the token belongs after the point of sale. So you've already paid the merchant, but before the point of redemption. SwapBot is designed to address the point of sale and make that very simple. And Tend, or token slot, depending on which version you're using, is intended to make the point of redemption really simple. But the token, that's where it exists. It exists in between that gap. And so your friend might say, well, so then do we even need to use tokens if I want something, if I want to buy something and use it right now? And the answer is no, you don't. Tokens don't replace the way that we do things now. They supplement it and they add more options and they add more possibilities that lacking tokens aren't there.
I like that analogy and other use case because I was having a hard time explaining to him what the benefits were. So that helps. We're moving on. So Tokenly was started by you. Who are the other teams that comprise of Tokenly? Yeah,
the first hire was Nick Rathman. When we originally hired him to work on the redesign for the LTB platform in the months leading up to the release of LTBcoin, so that we could have some kind of basic support in there for that. He's been fantastic, and everybody who we've worked with has been absolutely fantastic. So let's just get that right out of the way right there. But Nick really has just put in the hours and been a real partner as far as, I have ideas and I know what I want. I know the end result, but how I get there, to a certain extent, it's an advantage for me not to really understand the impossibilities of the things that I'm asking, because then sometimes I ask for things that I wouldn't ask for if I really understood how difficult it was going to be. Nick is a perfect example of that. He takes my ideas and has really, since the beginning, been able to interpolate them into something that's very usable and very useful. So that's been great. So he's the chief architect and a co-founder of Tokenly when we formalized that in November of last year. Devin Weller first worked with us, I guess it would have been back when we were just launching LTBcoin. We kind of hit a stumbling block where there were some tools that needed to be created before we felt like we could reasonably launch. And we had said that we were going to launch on certain days. And so we had this deadline coming up that was very important to hit. And if it wasn't for Devin taking on the role of project manager and really making sure that everybody kept moving forward with all the pieces, including myself, it wouldn't happen. And so that's how I met Devin. I'm not exactly sure where he came from in thinking about it, but I think he must have popped into one of our early open meetings or something like that and just kind of fell into what would eventually become another co-founder role. He's the CTO at Tokenly. My father, actually, you mentioned families. I've been working with my family on both Let's Talk Bitcoin and Tokenly now for the entire time. They've been some of the funding behind what we've been doing, and in general have been about as supportive as one could possibly imagine. So my father also is the CFO and co-founder of Tokenly, and that pretty much comprises the core team as it is right now. On the contractor side, we have Andy Beal as our legal counsel, and Rob Mitchell, who also is the host of the Bitcoin Game, has done a ton of art for us. He does pretty much any time I have art I can throw to somebody, he is the guy, and I really like his style. And then Marcin Ryberski has done a lot of contract design work for us on both the Tokenly website that's coming up and the SwapBot design. He was very instrumental in that. And so the team is very small. Oh, I forgot to mention Joe Looney. Joe Looney isn't officially with the team, but he's totally vital to the team. He's the developer, the community developer who has voluntarily built the open source first LTB companion and then the Tokenly Pockets wallet. We're going to hire him as quickly as we can, but so far he's just been working kind of as a community developer in the space. And so that's the team. And it's interesting, we definitely are lacking some people at this point. I fill the CEO role, but I'm really more of a catalyst, and I'm really more of like, I at other companies, I've taken the role Chief Visionary Officer because that's the thing that I'm really good at. I like to write, like a couple thousand words every couple of months, basically talking about where we're going next and what I think the next thing is going to be and what I think the next focus is going to be. And so it's been really interesting to kind of see that when I try to project out more than like 6 months, I'm pretty uniformly wrong. But if I try to project out 3 months, I'm pretty much right. And some of the early stuff that I wrote, the document that I called the Watershed Project is what would effectively eventually become Tokenly. And I wrote that and presented it in New York back in summer of 2013, almost 2 years ago, actually. It was the 31st of July. That has, again, proven to be, it was sort of funny because I forgot about it when the project didn't happen, but turns out Tokenly has been exactly what I wanted to do back then. I just kind of forgot about it since I wrote it so long ago. So,
Well, that's good. How did you go about funding this? I know you mentioned earlier that you got some funds from family members, but so talk a bit about the funding, and then particularly for the developers that came on. Did you pay them out of pocket, or did you pay them in rewards of LTB coin?
Well, so you're still talking to me at a time when we are pre-funding. We have been self-funded now for, like the Let's Talk Bitcoin project broadly has been self-funded the entire time. But Tokenly has, we've been putting money into that for quite a while, and it's been not an insubstantial amount of money too. I did get some money from family, and they certainly have been very supportive, but Tokenly as a whole has been paid for by cryptocurrency, basically. I've done a lot of things, and cryptocurrency worked out for me in a couple of circumstances. And so whether it was the right thing or the wrong thing to do, rather than, pull it out and become comfortable in life, we've just, piled it right back into this stuff. So Tokenly, as you see it now, is pretty much the, result of a year and a half of me being in cryptocurrency and making one or two right decisions.
Okay. Did you pay any of the developers with the reward being LTB coin or no?
Recently, we recently launched a token called Tokenly, because now that we actually have these services available, whichever ones you're talking about, and you have to pay for them with something, it made sense to create a digital gift certificate that represented our digital gift certificate. and was the best way to do any of that stuff. So yeah, actually, specifically in the last maybe month since we launched this alpha, I have been paying out small amounts of Tokenly to people who then sometimes go and trade it for LTB coin, or sometimes go and use it, or I don't actually know what everybody has done with it. Again, it's a token, so I can't tell until they redeem it. But yeah, we have been doing that, and it seems to be working for people. The real issue with tokens is just when they're not valuable, there's no reason to have them. And if you think they're going to be more valuable in the future, well, maybe that's a reason to have it. But it is speculative. And that was something that was true with LTB coin that I did not want to be true with the Tokenly token. I wanted the Tokenly token to have a nice, stable value that was dictated by what it could be used for. And frankly, since it's being sold into circulation, as a redeemable gift certificate rather than being given away, that made a lot more sense with what we're doing there. Let's Talk Bitcoin and the token. I really don't know what's going to happen with it. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with it. But as things become more available on the Tokenly side, I fully expect that we're going to see the value of LTB coin go up just because there's more utility for it.
Well, speaking of the LTB coin, I recently exchanged some of my LTB coin for Tokenly. So that was something that I saw as a means of getting from having accumulation of these LTB coins and actually exchanging them for something that had real value, so to speak. So
yeah, value that's not subjective. That's the thing. Is like the value of, and that is really at the core the difference between currency type applications and all this other stuff that I'm working on with Tokenly. When I saw the regulations that were being written, whether you're talking about New York or California or anywhere, they all were taking this monetary approach that cryptocurrency is de facto money. And so because of that, it has all of these onerous requirements placed on it that we normally place on people who deal with money or other people's money. And so from before I was talking about Tokenly in a serious way, it was really obvious to me that we needed non-monetary and non-currency uses of tokens. And so again, it's much the same thing here. So the question is, and the difference is that LTB coin is not a redeemable token. LTB coin is a usable token. It's an exchangeable token, but it has no redemption value. And that's different about pretty much everything else we're doing, whether you're talking about, the contraband coffee token that's redeemable for coffee, or the Tokenly token that's redeemable for Tokenly services. These are things that can be used right now that have fixed values and where the value is not dictated by the market, but is instead dictated by the person who is creating that value and offering it. And it's not like there's less risk in that situation. It's just a different risk. Instead of, it being, oh, well, the market might make a decision. It's, oh, well, this person might make a decision. So it comes down to really what you think of the person, what you think of the company, and also how much you perceive of a reputation hit they could take if they do something that is not appropriate.
What's next for Tokenly?
I don't really know, to be perfectly honest with you. We're playing it by ear at this point. We're, a very young company. We don't have a ton of costs, and so we're kind of just cruising through this period of, we're basically just trying to see what works and what doesn't. And the things that work, we're focusing more on that, and the things that don't, we're not focusing more on. We're about to start taking appointments where we're going to talk with venture capitalists and, variety of private investors and see how this kind of Tokenly as an infrastructure company is going to be received. But ultimately, I think that we might find that it's a little bit too boring. And the thing that we have to do is we have to say, okay, well, now that we've built this, set of tools, we'll do the next thing. And the next thing is going to be doing something like, the Audible application, or attacking one of these very specific markets that has such obvious advantages for moving over to tokens. And yet nobody is doing it because there's not an awareness of tokens. Again, like taking a market like that where people are already using application environments, where people are already used to paying for these things and already used to using them in what are effectively digital wallets, and the conversion from, use tokens for your audiobooks instead of using non-tokens for your audiobooks is absolutely simple and trivial when compared to trying to explain to somebody why they should use a different type of money than the one that they've, used all their lives and that's working fine for them. So to a large degree, whatever we do with Tokenly It is a Trojan horse for Bitcoin and for cryptocurrency, because these things are not really compatible with the old way. Just like you don't want to sell Bitcoin for PayPal, it's pretty much the same thing here. Somebody can reverse the PayPal transaction, but the token is gone. So necessarily, anybody who's using tokens, anybody who finds them really valuable and wants to, take the couple of steps to get into that ecosystem, once they're in, it's just like Napster, like, oh, this is a better way. It wasn't that hard to do it. I'm already done with the onboarding step. I guess I'll just use this stuff. So, whether we're right or not is going to be interesting, but that's been kind of my argument all along, is that tokens complete the value proposition that has been said about cryptocurrency for a very long time, which is that it's a better form of money. And that's true, but it doesn't matter. A better form of money isn't necessarily what people are asking for. People are asking for solutions to their problems, and those problems in large part can be solved by tokens.
Okay. What would you need from the LTB community in terms of marketing of Tokenly to them to say? Because I know that you have Spell of Genesis. You mentioned Contraband Coffee. I think there's one gentleman that's offering music composition and editing, and a variety of other people that are offering swap bots. But what would be your call to action for the community to assist in furthering this Tokenly revolution?
Honestly, it's hard to ask for stuff from the audience for me, which is a little bit funny. But I think the simple thing that people can do is just install the wallet. It's a good Bitcoin wallet. It's very usable. You can get it at pockets.tokenly.com. And it basically will handle you being convertible with tokens, you being able to use tokens, and you can still absolutely use Bitcoin. You can use the LTBN directory and all the other stuff that's in there, and makes it easy to send to other people on the network. But the reason to do it is so that then when you are ready to use a token, when you see a token that somebody's offering where you say, oh, that makes sense to me, I would buy that and give it as a gift, or I would buy that in bulk and redeem it over time, or any of these other things, that I think is the real valuable thing. And if people are, if you run a business, whether you're offering hourly time or what have you, I really do think that we have to hit this critical mass of people who are offering useful, valuable things for tokens in order for there to be enough of a reason for most people to convert. So that, again, is partly our fault, because we haven't done a good job of promoting this yet, because everything is in alpha and all that other stuff. But I mean, that's what I'm eventually going to ask of people, is that people who offer these services, offer goods and services as a business or as a private individual, that you just look at tokens and see if the advantages that they offer in terms of bulk discounts, redistribution, gift exchanges, all these other things, are compelling, and you think that there's something that you'd like to add. Because if they are, I think it makes a ton of sense. One of the interesting things to me is that now that we've come out with our solution, there are 2 or 3 others that are going to be out reasonably soon that, again, will build out this token infrastructure and that are going to be broadly compatible with all the stuff that we're doing. So I don't really think it's going to be about, it's going to necessarily be about us. I think that it's going to be about, we're the how, but the how is only interesting to people who need to know how to do it or need help doing it. The why is the important part, and I think that that's going to come from the outside.
Okay. One other thought I had, will LTB allow content creators to create content for tokens? So right now, as a contributor, I can write a document, or I can host a podcast and put it on the network. But if I were to tie that to a token and say, using the TCA, only those that have that could listen to that content, is that something that you all have thought about?
Yep, we're totally going in that direction. Token controlled access is something that we first implemented onto forums. And we're actually, I'm not sure this has been announced yet. We have a major redesign coming up that will basically modernize the site and integrate a lot of these early features that we put in kind of in prototype form. So the forums are going to be the first example of that. But yeah, no, Michael, you've completely identified where we're going with this stuff next. When it comes to you'll be able to have a blog that can be token controlled access on either just you can't even look at the blog, visit the front page of the blog unless you have the correct token. Or you could also have posts where, okay, you can look at the front page of the blog, but in order to read the full post and not get kind of the abridged post, well, you need to have a token. And that can be done on a post by post basis. Or you could have it be that, okay, well, within the post, you can see the whole post, but if you have this particular token, well, you can see this bonus part that is, kind of supplemental to the post. And that can actually be layered. So you could have 3 or 4 different tokens where each one provides a different type of access on a given post. So the possibilities are pretty much endless when it comes to this stuff. And token controlled access makes a lot of sense in a lot of different places. Whether it's not just websites, you're also talking about applications. You're also talking, basically token controlled access can effectively replace passwords. So yeah, and the most important thing to me about it, of course, is that when you have a token, you actually own it. You can't guarantee that somebody is going to redeem it, just like you can't guarantee what the price of Bitcoin is going to be when you redeem it, but you can guarantee that you own it, that you provably have it, that the only way you could have gotten it was by getting it from the person who created it and sold it to you in the first place. And if you didn't buy it from them, then you bought it from somebody else, or somebody else gave it to you who did. It's just the way the tokens work, just like Bitcoin. It's like, I can't create a new Bitcoin and give it to you. You literally can't do it. Same thing with tokens.
All of Tokenly right now is open sourced. Is that true? And will it continue to be true? Or are there aspects of Tokenly that's going to be closed source for the purpose of protecting your business and creating value proposition as you go forward?
We are attempting to do this as an entirely open source project, and not just open source, but also permissively licensed, which means that if you want to not just look at the source, but take it and deploy an installation of it and sell our services to other customers, then you can do that too. Is that if it becomes an impediment to have these permissive licenses because we're finding, okay, everybody is just competing with us and nobody is contributing back, then we would have to evaluate it, because Tokenly as a project, whether it continues or not, is largely dependent on us being able to find revenue models that make sense and that can scale and that really provide service that is valuable. I think that we've done that. But again, we kind of create competition when we, have these permissively licensed sources. So, I've talked with a lot of people, and, you look at somebody like OpenBazaar, and they're doing the same thing. They're completely open source, completely permissively licensed, but they got really visionary funders. And then you look at other projects. I was talking with the Streamium guys the other day, and they built their prototype as a completely open source, completely decentralized, free sort of thing. But now that they're funding their business, they're really not thinking that that's what it's going to be, that they're thinking it's going to be a proprietary product, because ultimately that's what investors demand. So I'm not exactly sure where we're going to wind up in that spectrum, but the intention is to have everything at least be open source for, ever.
From the psychology side, why are you an entrepreneur? What's your motivation and passion?
Oh, that's a good question. Because I want to solve problems. Because mostly I don't want to solve problems just like generically in a vacuum. I want to solve problems that are really annoying to me and that have been for a long time. You asked what about, very early in our conversation, what about LTB? And that was what it was about LTB, is that I saw solutions to problems that I had faced since starting doing podcasts. And the community, again, same thing, is that trying to do community on the internet basically meant trying to do community on the internet without getting any money from anybody in the community to do community on the internet, because all the methods were terrible for doing it. So cryptocurrency, and the other thing, of course, is that, if you have a couple $1,000s to throw at the problem, then it gets a lot easier. But that was never really a situation that I found myself in. Like, thinking back and looking back at the people who I worked with, even back, like the guy who did my first website for the gaming podcast I did in 2005, went on to be an engineer at Apple and was in charge of the division the last time for one of their projects last time I was checking. So, I didn't pay anybody. I haven't paid anybody ever for any of these projects. And that was in large part not because I hate paying people, but because there was never a good way to monetize any of this stuff. And so, that's where we are now, is that there are solutions available to problems that I always felt, and it would be crazy, given the opportunity, to not fix them. Okay.
Do you have a mentor? And if so, what's the most important lesson you learned from him or her?
I don't have a direct mentor. I've had a lot of mentors over time. I've been a mentor a lot of times. In this particular thing, I really think just observation becomes your mentor after a very, very brief period of time, because all of this stuff is happening in public, and that's so unusual. All of this development, Bitcoin is a perfect example, but it's also true of many of the companies around Bitcoin, is that they want to be inclusive. They want to build something that from the ground up is not about them, but is about us. And that's a really powerful thing. So I think that I've attempted to follow in the footsteps of some of the earlier, the earlier entrepreneurs who were not entrepreneurs first. They were Bitcoin people first, and then they came to entrepreneurship because it was the natural, logical extension of that thing that they felt about Bitcoin. It was just kind of the taking the theory and putting it in practice. It's much the same here. So my guidance would just be keep, pay attention and pay attention to what other people are doing. Pay attention to what's going on around you, and try to learn from stuff even when you aren't the one making the mistake, because it's much better to do that than the other.
We have another segment in the show that we call Off Topic. Just have a couple questions for you. Who's your favorite entertainer?
My favorite entertainer? That's a really hard question.
Okay, we're going to the next one. What's your favorite book?
Favorite book? Probably Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card.
Other than the businesses that you're currently working on, what are you also passionate about?
I'm passionate about solutions. So it just sort of depends on whatever I'm working on, right? And like whatever I'm thinking about, that's the thing that I get passionate about. And I'm not like, I really have a difficult time focusing on more than one thing at a time. I'm very single-minded. And it's the sort of thing where like, even to the point where when we're talking about food, like if I'm eating something that I enjoy, I would eat that for the next 2 weeks. Like no variety necessary whatsoever. I just like, if I'm enjoying it, then I want to keep eating it. There's no need to a break. And it's much the same thing with my attention on all these things.
How can people contact you?
Adam at LetsTalkBitcoin.com is the email for anything related to the show or the network. And Adam at Tokenly.com gets me for anything related to tokens, projects, or consulting. So yeah.
Thank you, Adam. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you all for listening to this episode of The Startup. Contents for the show was provided by Adam and Michael. If you are a founder of a startup and would like to be on the show, please email Michael at mikepair@gmail.com. That's MikePair@gmail.com. Oh, wait, I almost forgot. Here's a collaboration with Adam, DJ Leo, and myself. Hope you enjoy.
Bitcoin is the show is much people create content because it's what they love.
Concept Bitcoin.
And just superimpose a QR code. Job that they love.
If you don't trust any other currency, this is where you